Oh, yes, of course. At a WIN meeting shortly. So, today we're discussing the situation in Britain and principally around the Your Party issue and the idea of how we're going to build a mass party in Britain to take on the Tories and to change society for that matter. I'll make a couple of brief comments on myself just before the discussion gets going. There have been 12 Labour governments in Britain since World War One, and we need to look at them and see where were the failings and what comparisons and what lessons can we draw with regard to building a new organisation. Some of these parties some of these Labour governments had a left-wing orientation and history. For example, the Attlee government in the immediate post-war period. But we need to remember also that the Attlee government was in power during the situation in Palestine and during the situation in India, both of which ended in complete disaster. So even though Attlee is represented historically as a very progressive Prime Minister in terms of the health service, the education service, social welfare, and so on, national health, we got to recognise also the record of that government. There have been also left-wing tendencies within the Labour Party over the years. One of the larger ones was the Tribune group within the British Labour Party. In fact, there was a move earlier against the Labour government in the post-war period of the left. And then during the 60s and into the early 70s, a group of left-wing, or a number of left-wing small parties, Trotskyist parties, entered the Labour Party and worked to achieve changes and to build organizations, their own organizations within the Labour Party. For example, the International Socialists, which came from the Revolutionary Communist Party, Trotskyist party in the post-World War II period, they had a very strong influence, particularly amongst Labour youth. They became what's now the Socialist Workers' Party. There was then the International Marxist Group, who also worked for a brief period in the Labour Party. The militant organisation devoted a lot of time and work to the Labour Party. At one point, there were 4 MPs in Parliament, members of the militant organisation. Dave Nellis, Terry Fields, Pat Wall, and a comrade in Edinburgh whose name just escapes me now. The militant controlled Labour youth, had significant influence in the trade union movement, some local councillors. So when we're examining the future, we need to bear in mind what lessons can be drawn, what went wrong, and what steps were taken that we need to guard against on this occasion. We also need a bit more information in this discussion for the comrades who are not working in the British Labour Party about who exactly is in the Your Party organisation and what tendencies do they represent. For example, who is Sultana? We know she's an MP and all that kind of stuff, but we need to know a bit more about what she represents in terms of perspectives in the British Labour Party. We need to know a bit more also about the left-wing groups, the Socialist Workers' Party and other similar groups who have entered the Your Party, where they came from, what their influence is, and what is going to be the likely outcome. Similarly, we need to know a bit more about Corbyn, the silent man. We need to know a bit more about what perspectives are facing the Corbynite groups within this emerging party. So these are questions we're hoping to explore and analyse in some detail. We need to bear in mind also that the majority of comrades at this meeting are not in the British organisations, not in the Your Party or in similar affiliated bodies. So a lot of explanation is required as to what the perspective is going to be for the developments there, whether there's a split, what that split represents. There's also necessity for a discussion about the trade union movement and where it fits into the general perspectives for growth and development in the Your Party. So with these introductory remarks, the main speaker today is Matthew, so we welcome Matthew. And after Matthew has completed his opening contribution, there'll then be plenty of time for discussion. And we're hoping in a discussion of this nature, there'll be lots of toing and froing and re-examination of positions and re-examination of issues, particularly in the fluid situation that now exists in the British Labour movement. So how much time do you think you would require, Matthew?
Probably about 20, 25 minutes.
Okay, so I'll send you a reminder in the after say 20 minutes or so.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so away you go.
All right. Thanks, comrades. No, it's an introduction that, obviously, I'm not going to cover all that. in 25 minutes, but I think that, under the conditions, I mean, we're seeing a significant movement here in terms of what's been happening in Britain. I mean, in terms of its traditional politics, and in terms of the shift, both to the left and the right, as things actually disintegrate. I think that the important thing here really is to note the disintegration of as the system itself, the crisis intensifies. It's destroying its existing political structures, which is what's happening in the US and elsewhere as well. But it's happening in Britain, and it's destroying the political parties with it. You can see that the Tory party, which is the traditional ruling party in Britain, has been basically reduced to more or less a husk. The Labour Party similarly is falling apart, or has been blown apart, because obviously both the contradiction in terms of its inability to move beyond neoliberalism and deliver anything, and also of course the political crisis in terms of its extreme unpopularity for that point. Now, I mean, I think the important thing to say in terms of the history of the Labour Party, actually, of course, as it falls apart, is to point out that, of course, the left of the Labour Party has always been subordinate to the right. The right's always been the ruling part of the thing, and therefore, in that sense, as I say, you look at it and dialectically, what it does do is it gives a degree of control of the left, or a very large section of the left, for the right wing and the ruling class. And as it falls apart, that control disintegrates and the thing goes down. Now, you can look at it. The important thing here in those terms, of course, is the victory of Corbyn in 2015, which showed that actually, I mean, for what of course, the thing itself, that the right could not be assured of power anymore. And that there were people out, people were prepared to use the Labour Party as a mechanism to fight, essentially to fight austerity and so on and so forth. And so you wind up the situation where effectively what they had to do once they'd managed to get rid of Corbyn was to destroy the left, the Labour Party, and drive it out, which is what more or less what Starmer major part of the Starmer-Mandelson project. So in those terms, it then becomes a question. Well, what happens next? In that you do have, of course, I think the other thing you should bear in mind in terms of what Finn has said, of course, is that the union bureaucracy in Britain remains welded to the Labour Party. I mean, absolutely welded to the Labour Party. Whether that hasn't changed at this point, and that's a further discussion. So, in those terms, what happens, of course, is then Corbyn is then driven out of the Labour Party, essentially, or effectively told he's no longer in the parliamentary Labour Party, effectively driven out of the Labour Party by shortly after Starmer's election. Now, the question then becomes, what the political impact of that is in terms, and the fact that then, of course, you have that most of the left is either driven out or leaves the Labour Party. Over the process of the years leading up to the general election. The general election, the Labour Party is strictly controlled actually through Labour Together, which is created by Peter Mandelson. So in those terms, it then becomes, well, what's the political impact of that? And the question of, well, is there an alternative? Now, this alternative, your party is a symptom, if you like, of that effort to produce an alternative. Basically, people have essentially been asking Corbyn to create something which he, of course, has been very, very reluctant to do. I mean, because politically he does not go beyond the Labour Party and left reformers and the Labour Party as such. Because obviously, I mean, I think if you look at his career, I mean, it's quite clear that he would be quite happy to remain on the backbenches of the Labour Party given the chance. But obviously, under the conditions, he can't be given that chance. So, in those terms, your party then appears or does not appear until after the general election of 2024, in which the Labour Party achieves this massive majority by freak of the electoral system in this country was actually fewer. You have to bear in mind, of course, that the great victory of Starmer saw the Labour Party achieve fewer votes than Corbyn got in either 2017 or the alleged appalling disaster of 2019. Mostly because actually there was the right was split. The vote to the right was split between Reform and the Tories, and therefore the Labour Party was able to gain enormous numbers of seats on the basis of an incredibly low vote. 35%, something of that nature, because of the nature of the system that exists. So after that, it then becomes this move towards an effort to create something new, which is centered around essentially people organizing locally. There's been local groups been organized over all that period, standing in council elections, organizing socialist groups in various ways, and mostly in England, some certain amount in Wales. Not in Scotland, really, because I think Scotland is a different political situation, which obviously don't have time to go through here. Anyway, so then, of course, there becomes a pressure from those groups attempt to coordinate themselves and to ask Corbyn to set this thing up, which doesn't take place until mid 2025. So a year after the general election, and after the conditions in which the Labour Party immediately becomes incredibly unpopular in the country. I mean, clearly, with the fact that obviously that the institution of a Labour government just means neoliberalism over again. It means the Labour Party. Hang on.
Where's that coming from?
Sorry, it's Dominic. I've muted him. So it basically the Labour Party immediately moves, as soon as it gets in government, immediately moves to remove winter fuel payments to pensioners, basically as a sign to the ruling class that it will be faithfully serve its ends and be sure to continue neoliberalism, which of course then the sign is then taken by everybody that of course it's just the same old lot again. Which it clearly is, and of course, even the whole business of removing the ridiculous and iniquitous two-child benefit cap, which is, in any rational sense, really a very stupid means of oppressing small children, mostly, it results in people being suspended from the Parliament and the Labour Party for voting for it, including, of course, particularly Zara Sultana, but also a number of others. So what's then happens, of course, is then you get this effort organised, mostly around a thing called Collective, in order to try and get Corbyn to produce a new party. This then eventually succeeds in about July 2025, and there is an initial appeal. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that after this not long process, is there's an initial appeal, and you immediately get the sign up of something on the order of 850,000 people, which at that level, you're talking about, can easily be parlayed into something like 1 million odd people, which is the guts of the active section of the working class, really, and should be viewed as a class response. Now that, of course, under the conditions and under the politics of the people involved, particularly Corbyn, but also others, was reviewed essentially with fear. I think you have to understand, in terms of that, in those terms, to an effort that there was no way that under those conditions that could be translated into an organisation, because that poses too many questions, far too many questions, like who controls this organisation, like what is it for, and how much power and influence will it have? Because obviously, if you've got a membership, anything like that, it immediately becomes the largest activist outfit in the country of any sort, and would have enormous just have a huge impact, and there was no way they were going to do that. So in those terms, then you have another whole struggle in terms of the effort then to translate into that into some kind of membership. So that, there's then a delay, and in fact, and assorted forms of wrangling, and it works out that on one side we have in shortly thereafter in September last year, Zara Sultana and the people around her launch a membership portal. Basically, they thought that there had been an agreement to do so. And of course, the people around Corbyn objected to this because obviously they didn't want to do it. And, they hadn't agreed. So what you then wind up with is 20,000 people sign up to that membership portal within about a day and a half. So you can see, obviously, there's a desperate, there is an appetite for this. I mean, really, a very large number of people. Corbyn then objects and said, well, he will sue Sultana for this, and all this sort of stuff. So there's huge public wrangling, which performs the function, of course, of distracting a whole lot of people from actually getting involved in the thing. And eventually, some weeks later, Corbyn themselves decides to move to open a portal to get people to join as members. So you have that as the first launch, which, I mean, successfully manages to put off large chunks of people. I mean, obviously the 850,000 not been heard of since. And of course, seeing this also, of course, there is an attempt by across whole chunk of the society, particularly obviously the media, etc., to promote the Greens. And Zach Polanski, that we can discuss in more detail later. But clearly not a socialist organisation, not a working class organisation, actually, a classically petty bourgeois party, and a party which obviously at every turn votes and supports the initiatives of the ruling class and the orders of the ruling class, for whatever verbiage may come out of them. But of course it distracts numbers of people, and they can see this thing operates, and your party and so on is a mess and doesn't operate. So then, of course, you then see what then happens is that people is two things. One, people start setting up branches of this thing. People start getting together and setting up branches and appealing publicly and saying, well, can we set up branches in various places and all the rest of it. Which then results in a whole series of organisations being set up around the country, a network of branches being set up by the most active people, under conditions in which those people are then not allowed or effectively denied access to the data or means of contacting those people who have joined, or indeed any money. So those branches actually operate on the basis of essentially people's goodwill. But however, there are a lot of them, and they do cover most of the country. So you get that. Then you get a position in which there is then an effort to found the thing in November last year, and they held a conference. The conference held in Liverpool, which is interesting for two reasons. There are two reasons. One, come to the conference on the basis of the day before founding an organisation. The people running the organisation, who are mostly unknown people around Corbyn, most of whom are not refuse actually to be publicly named even, then announced that they start expelling people from an organisation that hasn't actually formally been founded yet. Particularly the members of the SWP. and some others. In fact, one of the members of an organisation called Counterfire, which is a split from the SWP, who they later readmitted, a guy called Michael Lavalette, who got readmitted because obviously he got elected as a councillor. Now, if you're a councillor and a public official, therefore you're far too important to expel under the conditions. It's a bit bizarre, but however, they did it. They basically went through the list of people on the central committee of the Socialist Workers' Party and issued a whole chunk of them with expulsion letters. Now, some of those people had actually joined and objected, obviously, to being expelled the day before a conference for an organisation that they weren't actually, that they'd applied to be members of and which they weren't members of and which hadn't actually started yet and didn't formally have any rules. And other people said, well, we haven't actually applied to join this thing, but you said we've been expelled anyway. Which is extraordinary. So then you come to this conference. The conference itself was it was a very interesting gathering because obviously what you got was people from all over the country. Everybody got a look at who's actually in the thing, and mostly, of course, it's actually the lefty activists actually of
quite a different character to the Corbyn movement. I mean, if those of us who were actually in the Labour Party during the Corbyn movement, Corbyn movement tended to be largely older people. Certainly, my experience anyway. Well, I think I'm in Scotland, and it's again in Scotland is slightly different, as I say, but it tended to be people who were slightly older. This movement actually is a lot younger. It's a lot younger. By and large, and it's not people. It's not actually. It's more or less people who are involved in assorted campaigns, Palestine, trade unions, etc., etc. Who are activists, and as I say, they're markedly younger than the average for the Corbyn movement, although a lot smaller, as you know. As you know, the Corbyn movement was hundreds of thousands, whereas this is like tens of thousands. Anyway, so. There's that. There's also, of course, the groups. So we wind up with some groups actually joined. The SWP joined, put quite a lot of effort into it. The Socialist Party, who many of you may know, one of the splits off the militant, they joined. So other groups like the what's called the Revolutionary Communist Party, Alan Woods and Co. Another split off the militant, joined and then effectively walked away. But none of these things none of the groups actually amounted to huge amounts in terms of the organisation, which was principally done by this cadre of younger activists. So what happened at the conference really was then quite strange because of what happened. The thing was very controlled. Essentially the motions were based on things that had been on documents that had been written by the bureaucracy around Corbyn, and the alternatives that were offered were again that offered by those people, which I mean people did actually vote for the sort of the best of what was on offer, but there was no real ability for people to write vast numbers of amendments, which would have been forthcoming, no doubt would have been forthcoming, or indeed to prioritise what amendments they did want to discuss, etc. So, yes, that it's been very in those terms. It was a very interesting phenomenon. The next thing in those in terms was the election to the leadership body. They devised a leadership body called the Central Executive Committee, which lots of people objected to on the fact it sounds like a bunch of very elderly Stalinist bureaucrats meeting in a back room somewhere. But anyway, so and the problem being, of course, is it's very small for running a national organisation. It amounted to something on the order of about 24 people to run a national organisation, which is tiny, really. I mean, you could easily to run a proper organisation, you probably need twice that number. And it's been elected they then proposed to have an election based on electing two people for each English region, and one person from Wales and one person from Scotland, which is quite bizarre in itself because obviously there were far more members in Scotland, for instance, and some of the English regions didn't go down very well. So they then held this election again on a very strange basis, in which they asked for people to come up with 75 nominations, again on the basis of not being able to contact the membership, and they then ran on the basis of those people who had received the nominations. The election was run on, essentially dominated by two slates, as you might expect. I mean, obviously, the interesting thing was that the left itself was able to organise a thing called the grassroots left slate, which again was not, there was no involvement of the left groups. Neither the SWP, the main two, which is the Socialist Party, or the SWP, participated in grassroots left slate, and it was based on a series of discussions and so on, and they managed to put up people to all the different regions, and did reasonably well in terms of the actual election itself, because obviously the Corbyn slate, called the Many, of course, had all the advantages in terms of having access to the membership data, having access to money. It has been estimated that the party's central bureaucracy spent 25,000 quid of the members' money to get its people elected. So, yeah, in those terms, you didn't wind up with this thing of CEC, which has been about something like 14 members of the Many, 7 members of the grassroots left, 2 people who are close to grassroots left, and then of the four they had additionally 4 public officials who are either MPs or councillors, and that was evenly split between the Corbynites and the Many, including Zara Sultana. So yesterday, there was an interesting discussion that the problem is that to get this to actually meet, because the CEC is supposed to run the thing, but they don't actually want it at this point to meet. It's quite, and the operation of this thing is quite bizarre, and under conditions in which the organisation itself, and most places, wants to stand in the elections in various parts of Britain in May. So nominations, etc., will have to be delivered within the next few weeks, and people will need to sort out candidates, etc., under conditions in which essentially the thing is being deadlocked. Now, I don't think that's an accident. I mean, it's a political question. It becomes a political question. What is the nature of the thing? And of course, the other thing, of course, is who controls it. Under conditions in which the ruling class itself has made it very clear, absolutely clear, that it's not offering any reforms. It doesn't want to negotiate reforms, except ones that, of course, result in it extracting more from the working class. That it is determined to move to a war economy, and to start, as various senior state and military officials have said, well, you lots are going to have to get used to the idea. Lots of you are going to get killed, and we're going to run conscription and all this sort of thing. So there's a vanishingly small position, if you're a reformist, to run a political organisation on that basis, because either you do what you're told, or you have to revolt against the ruling class. Now, I mean, that's the alternatives on offer. The other thing, of course, is the question of who controls the thing. All the organisations I've been in have some form of control. Usually, if you're talking about the Labour Party was, of course, as was made absolutely clear during the Corbyn period, actually controlled by its bureaucracy, paid members of staff, which operated on a completely separate basis to everybody else, and had absolute control of what the organisation, or near absolute control of what the organisation was allowed to do. Even the SSP had a central group in the middle of it, which essentially controlled the thing, as had virtually everything else. The problem with this, of course, is what you've got
excuse me, is a situation where you have an organisation which doesn't have any of that. I mean, it does have a small bureaucracy in the middle, but it doesn't have any basis of control anywhere in the country. There's no basis to control the operation of branches and so on, either bureaucratically or politically at this point. So, in those terms, that is why you wind up with this situation where they're trying to freeze the thing, and prevent people from doing things because they can't control them, and they can't control organisations. And in political terms, it's then about the actual. It's about the actual nature of the thing. Is it reformist or does it go beyond that? Does it actually start? As you would expect, the logic of it must do, is to go beyond that and start challenging. In terms of the nature of how even to the basis of the rotten state of local government or the rotten state of any public service, etc. And the general degenerate state of the country and society. So it's entirely understandable in those terms of what's happening within your party. But what it isn't is what the problem is. Of course, people don't understand that. On top of that, of course, is a huge level of political confusion. Basically, because the left itself is not particularly well organised, nor has it actually had any particular discussion of what's going on, or the nature of the society, or what perspectives it has. How does it do something about it? And so it's both all of these things all at once. So it does make it very difficult to move it forward in terms of actually organising the thing. So I'll leave it there, and I suspect we'll probably get lots and lots of questions and observations. And I certainly can go into more detail on anything that people want to say. Ian Drummond should be here at some point as well. He's in the middle of a your party meeting in Edinburgh at this point.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matthew. You've explained a lot of the issues which are obviously in comrades' minds, I would say, at this point. And you've also made very clear the confusion and the trickery that's going on to maintain that confusion and make sure that the membership don't get control of the organisation. So you've made all that clear. So there's a need for lots of experiences to be aired here. We need to explore a lot of the issues around that, how things are going to change, and what the perspective is. What's going to happen to the organisation? Is it going to split? If it does split, what's going to happen? What do the two splits represent? And where's the future? So is the whole thing a pointless exercise? Or is there work to be done and gains to be made by working in certain ways within the structure? So all these questions we expect to see covered. And also that question of the trade unions. Match was right about the trade union bureaucracy being wedded to the Labour Party, a bit like the Democrats in the US. But nonetheless, the membership of the unions require and will be demanding a party that represents their interests. And what kind of trends and developments are happening within the unions with regard to the new party. So, Galaxy S8, I presume it's a technical term, but there's a hand up representing Galaxy S8. No response. I wonder which Galaxy the comrade is going to be speaking from. So, meanwhile, Timos, your hand was up.
Sorry, it's me, Phil Pope.
Oh, sorry, that's Galaxy. Yeah, in you come.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to leave to pick my daughter up. So I'm on my phone.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, so just a few points about these elections. I've been a campaigner for STV and proportional representation for ages, but the way they rigged the rules totally went against the principles of STV. Main problem was doing it in 9 regions of 2 seats. Like, it totally messes up any proportionality, and it really encourages the polarization we saw with two slates going head to head. Nearly all the independents or other minority points of view pushed out, and there was really no need to do it. Like, we had this gender quota in these elections, That didn't mean we ran separate elections for men and women. It meant that in all the constituencies, you wouldn't let the last woman get eliminated. Could have done that with regions. He said the last two people from the northeast cannot get eliminated. You could have ended up with regional representation that way, but people would have had the choice to vote for any candidate they wanted, not the limited number they were presented with. In one region, there were only 4 candidates, 2 from each slate. There wasn't a single independent in the East of England region because of the nomination threshold. So yeah, they were very unfair elections. In 3 regions, that rule about the quota definitely made the difference and gave the many slate 3 extra seats. And can you still hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm very disappointed. Basically, I see it as a rigged election, and the conference was also manipulated. I don't really see it as a democratic organisation. Like, they've got away with rigging conference in one set of elections, so they'll do it again next year if they're worried that they'll lose control.
Okay.
And the left has put itself in a really bad position because if you're going to call an election out as corrupt and unfair, you've got to do it before the results come out. Otherwise, you just look like a sore loser. But sadly, put all their eggs in the basket of hoping they'd somehow get a majority for the grassroots left. It's a question whether that could ever happen, because frankly, people who are prepared to rig the rules of an election, like they definitely did, are also probably willing to rig the ballots as well if they see they're going to lose. Like, what were they doing for 2 days between the ballot closing and announcing the results? It doesn't take that long for a computer to work out the result. It can only mean humans fiddling with it, I'd say. Yeah, so it's not a good position. Like, the left is cocked up, frankly, because Corbyn didn't want this centralised national party. The left pushed for it to be a national centralised party and has now lost control of it to the clique around Corbyn, and is now stuck in an organisation that is far from perfect and far from what anyone wanted. Like, some groups are staying in it because they only ever saw it as a recruiting ground. Others are stuck in it because they're worried half the members will go native if they criticise it and leave. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess, I'm afraid, in my opinion. I'll finish it there before I...
Yeah, thanks for your contribution, comrade. There's an interesting question there. I presume our own supporters are part of the grassroots left. So what future are they facing into? What are the implications of the developments that you explain and the issue of Corbynite control of the organisation? So that needs to be looked at, and comrades need to explain a bit more about that so we can get a full understanding of it. So after Temos, Dominic or John?
Well, first of all, I'm not closely in touch with what's going on in Britain, so whatever I say might be completely wrong. But from what I see from outside, it's that the fact that this party was created with the support of a huge number of people, 850,000. I mean, that's an incredible number, and it shows exactly that there is a void that has to be filled. At the same time, what happened and the fact that they couldn't put their act together, Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and the rest of the people, shows that there was nobody in a position to lead this party with a clear class program to and get its act going. in any case, such huge numbers were not interested in your party as Marxists. They were interested in forming a party that would represent their problems and try to get something better for the working class, rather than the Starmerite labor. And the fact that more than 90% of these people just disappeared at the first disappointment, it shows that it couldn't be sustainable unless there was a leadership that could really give something specific and show the way forward. In this sense, I suspect that calling for a party at this stage, it was a bit premature, but it came out from the grassroots, and correctly Win supported it and tried to do the best it could. At the same time, I don't think we should be caught in this binary, the Corbynites and the left, because I think we have much less in common with the sectarian left, with SWPs and the various groups. We've lived with them for a long time to know that they are up to no good and they can offer nothing. So what remains is to see what can be done for the party itself. And I think the only viable way forward is to throw all our effort in building up the party at the grassroots. And there we need a few things. We need to have a program, a simple program that could be easily understood and can be campaigned for in the local branches. And we should be able to put out policies that could unify the party. And at this stage, we shouldn't underestimate the feeling of the people who are trying to build the party that unity is needed. So just complaining about what happened, just complaining about the stealing of the election is not going to get traction. We are not going to succeed with that. We have to prove that through patient work at the grassroots and build there our work in our program, build there what can be done with what's going on, and avoid splits at any cost. I mean, all these sectarians, they will probably sooner or later start getting out of the party and accusing this sort of thing. I don't think that's the way we should be going. We should be deciding each step on our own terms without identifying with the sectarians in your party, and providing our policies forward patiently and trying to give real power to the branches. This gives us another great advantage. We shall be working for democratic processes within the party, which is what is needed at this stage. Democratic means all. I mean, we have discussed this so many times, we know what we mean. We don't mean formal democratic procedures and formal voting systems and this sort of thing. We need a clear understanding of the issues and mechanisms for the members to decide the policies.
Thank you, Temos. Before John or Dominic speaks, could some comrade in a future contribution explain the role that Sultana is playing now in relation to the left, the grassroots left? And another question is, what are the Socialist Workers' Party going to do? Are they going to continue to strive to become a majority in the left or something? I don't know. I mean, are there still members? But anyway, what are we going to do? Or what are supporters of Win and such going to do? And particularly in relation to Sultana and what influences she represents. So they're just questions comrades might bear in mind when they're speaking. So Dominic or John, followed by Norma.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I'd just like to say to Demos that as far as Corbyn is concerned, And as far as the left in Britain is concerned, there has been a history in the Labour Party of having a left wing and a right wing and open debates. But over the last period, that has been under quite serious attack from the right wing. Corbyn got elected as leader of the Labour Party with a massive majority. And instead of using that majority to ensure that democracy ruled in the Labour Party, he bowed the knee to a paid bureaucracy that quite openly was hostile to the left and was out to get rid of the left at any cost. The thing is that there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews expelled from the Labour Party because they were anti-Semitic. What was their anti-Semitism? They had the gall to criticise Netanyahu and the Israeli government and the Zionists rule in Israel for the genocide they were perpetrating against the Palestinians. Corbyn's slogan was the many, not the few. Yet when he got in, it was the few, not the many. So from that point of view, for a coalescence of the left wingers to come together and have, 800,000 saying they wanted some organisation, they looked to Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the left to create that organisation. And from the word go, he has absolutely tried to sabotage any realistic organisation of the left. I'll leave it at that on that issue. And another issue, which is in the area that Dominic and myself live in, and that is the Gorton and Denton by-election. I'd just like to say a few words about that and about the Greens. The position's one that everybody thought that, what's his name, who leads Farage, was going to be like Attila the Hun and would lay waste Gorton and Denton and have a massive majority because it was a working class area, and obviously working class people, in the eyes of a lot of middle class people, are lumpen. And they highlighted a lot of lumpenness, particularly against immigrants, in the local news. And if you like, anybody with an ounce of sense would look at the sort of settings that they had these pro-reform people. They were generally in the back rooms of pubs, predominantly middle-aged and older men, going on about how Britain wasn't as good as it used to be. So, if you like in Caerphilly, there was a sort of unofficial attitude of who best is going to beat reform, because everybody thought it would be a battle between reform and whoever was picked. Now, it very quickly came about that the only decent candidate standing against reform was actually the Green candidate. The Labour candidate was somebody nobody knew. I think she'd been a councillor or something in Manchester. The Liberals picked a former councillor from Manchester. And just a little insight into Manchester. After Thatcher and since Thatcher, there's not been one Tory councillor elected in Manchester. After Clegg and his debacle on the student grants or the student loans, the Liberals, who were represented about a third of the council in Manchester after the Tories went, they were totally wiped out. And for a period of 3 or 4 years, Manchester was 100% Labour. Now, the whole fear was that reform would beat Labour. And the situation was when the election came, there was a battle between Labour and Reform, but that battle was for second place because the Greens swept in with a nearly 5,000 majority. And Labour and Reform had about 1,000 between them. Reform got 10,000, Labour got 9,000. All the other parties, was about a dozen of them, between them probably got 2,000 votes. The Tories and the Lib Dems got about 700 or 800 votes apiece. So, if you like, the Greens got in with a huge, well, not a huge majority, but a sizable majority, nearly 5,000. And then the analysis after the election was one that people enthusiastically voted for the Greens. And that included one of the wards, which is about 50-50 Muslim, white, Longsight, voted for the Greens because of the stance that the Greens had taken on Palestine, because locally they'd elected pro-Palestinian councillors. And the whole feeling was one, that the election represented a feeling of togetherness and comradeship, rather than what, if Reform had got in, would have probably been street gangs attacking Asian and black people. They probably got as good as they gave in that sense, because they weren't going to stand for, if you like, Reform thuggery. But the Reform went with the tail between the legs. And just an interesting thing, in her election address, when she won, the candidate said that she represented working people. She highlighted the deprivations that have taken place over the last 30 or 40 years to ordinary working people, unable to afford holidays, buy a house, etc. And she, if you like, attacked the billionaires that were running the country. And it's, if you like, I think relevant to Manchester, that one of the billionaires running the country lives in Monaco, doesn't pay any tax. I think he should have paid about £4 billion in tax. A guy called Radcliffe, who said that Britain was being colonised by immigrants, and that created uproar. And this man, owns a huge chemical firm in Britain. And the whole feeling was one that the Greens represented that. And there was lots of discussion going on as to who was the best person to vote for. And the general consensus was one that the Greens were outgoing. They represented not socialism, but they did represent a community together.
But they said, lying in the pockets of billionaires.
Yeah, but the other parties, the Tories and Labour, were lying in the pockets of billionaires. So from that point of view, while the Greens are not anti-capitalist and they don't lay the problems of society at the door of capitalism, definitely the feeling was one that, that there was this just revulsion at what had been happening. And as I say, Labour actually had a reasonable vote in the circumstances. Reform, they were just short of Reform. But, it's just to say that while one can analyse what the policies of the Green Party are, on the doorstep they have to put over a semi-socialist position, a decent standard of living for the working class, and if you like, the pollution that now plagues us, being at the hands of big business. I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thank you, John. After Norma and Harry have spoken, perhaps Match can come back and answer some of the issues that have been raised by the earlier speakers. So Norma, followed by Harry.
Thank you very much. I have few points, just 2 comments and one question to Matthew or perhaps the other participants. I would like, I mean, for myself, I prefer to have much more clarity or precisions on an explicit programmatic proposal rather than these internal conflicts and problems between different fractions, or I mean, I am not in your country, but it seems the beginning of these elections or this self-organization of this so-called your party have many problems. And said, it seems from outside, it's a real mess. And so, I mean, we are spending, I mean, and you, I mean, the people who are internally participating, spending a great amount of time in how organize, on how, I mean, it seems that there are many conflicts. I don't say them myself. I mean, I learned from the very clear summary when, I mean, distributed to this meeting. So my question, so this is the first point. More on a short but clear, precise, programmatic proposal for this party. And a question to Matthew, what is shortly your conclusion, if any, because a conclusion could be non-conclusion, and which is the proposal which open here for the working class or trade union, and my question for myself is, if now, I mean, at the moment, there is some statistical evaluation of which is the political representation of how the working class, the trade unions will or are voting, which is more or less. I would like to see that because it seems that is very important. And so, the name of a party, a political party or a movement, the name, the proposal or the programmatics, and the methods, just, I mean, the internal organization, independent of the name, I mean, of the persons, but the methodology to avoid all these kinds of conflicts. I mean, the people who are the Mr. Corbyn or, I mean, the others are not newcomer in politics. So all that, I think that at this time of modern practice should be ameliorated. And so now came, I mean, I follow it also, the Win chat attentively. There are comrades who want to leave your party to go to other Greens. I mean, there are other comrades who said, no, it's not the time to leave the Navy. If one need to continue, said the amelioration of the battle. But from outside, I found that very, I mean, it's not a very clear situation, putting in a very said kind of term. The other would be, it's not a good, your party, your party, what is your, I mean, if I put a name, we are organizing your party, and who recognize as you, your party? I think this is rather ambiguous already from the name, and with a program or a programmatic, a short, I mean, points, clear points. I am not saying just in international position, which is very important at this moment, even more geopolitical, but for the UK, your country, working class, trade union, and with the modern concept of working class and the trade unions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Norma. Okay, Harry.
Yeah, you know, anyone on the genuine left that had any doubt about where this party is going had it answered in this election to the CEC. I mean, at the conference, it certainly appeared that the Sultana wing had a majority with the amendments and so on that was at the conference. But this election now leaves Corbyn and the faction in complete control of your party. They will now control the branches, which are going to be organised from the centre, the CEC, and they will now control policy. And the Sultana wing has been pushed to the sidelines. What I think has happened in this election is that effectively only half of those eligible to vote did so. There was about 44,000 eligible voters, around 25,000 actually voted. And what I think has happened is that the left and the Sultana people as supporters did not vote in this election. In other words, the damage done to your party already occurred before this election result was announced. They've left the party. Polls, out in the public arena, last July, your party, there was about 18% vote by one of the polls. That dropped to 12% in November. And now there's absolutely no support, and I mean none, no support for your party in the country, none. It's all sort of gone to the Green Party. The party is gone, it's dead, and that election to the CEC has put the final nail in the coffin of your party. Finn, maybe you asked a question about Sultana and the SWP, where they're going in this. Well, Sultana's made it clear where she's going. The statement that she released after the election is that we are going to work, Sultana's wing is going to work within the party, call for your party unity, and work within effectively this faction that they have no control over at all. And Corbyn's always been aware of that, because despite all the treachery and the bureaucracy of Corbyn, just like we saw when he was the leader of the Labour Party, same treachery then has now been imposed in your party. And the mistake now that Sultana's making on the SWP is to work within this party. This party's gone. The best thing for Sultana, if she's genuine, and that is an if, by the way, and the SWP, is to make a completely clean break from your party, away from the Corbyn faction, abandon them, and to set up a new party, a proper party. It needs to be a revolutionary socialist party with a socialist program. That's what the country needs. Now, at the moment, as we've seen in the Gorton and Denton by-election, there's a massive surge now towards the Greens. The Greens they have no opposition at all, really, from any other left party. And all they have to do is come in with a limited left programme. And the result is there's an overwhelming number of people who see themselves on the left will actually swarm to that party. The unfortunate thing is that the working class will have to go through that illusion that the Greens are going to deliver. They're not. We know all about state and revolution, reform and revolution, and that whole illusion now is unfortunately going in the direction of the Greens, who I think will, no reason why not, they're not going to continue in their by-election successes, and we'll see what happens in a general election in a couple of years' time against, Reform UK and so on and so forth. Who knows what's going to happen, but they might actually become a sizable force. Who knows of what's going to happen? The Labour Party's gone. It's finished unless they can get a new Labour. So the perspectives out there, it's not to say that there isn't a perspective for the left and the socialist left, The problem is, and it's not just Sultana's making the mistake, it's many of the other, even revolutionary socialist parties are making the same mistake, is they're not organizing correctly. They're building a party from the center down when they should be building an organization, revolutionary organization, from the grassroots up. You build an organization on a socialist program by organizing workers' committees in factories, in workplaces, in hospitals, in schools, right across the board. That's where you build that organization, from that bottom up. And what materializes, it becomes democratic. Not to say that you can't be oversee treacherous workers who will try to undermine those workers' committee. That does happen. You have to guard against that at all times. But that's where any revolutionary party is built, from the grassroots up, not from the center down. And it's the mistake made. It's not just made by even Sultana's wing or even any other wing. It's a mistake. You take a look at the Socialist Party. I went to the meeting of the Socialist Party in Liverpool. The illusions. This is a revolutionary socialist organization, the militant. And the illusions that they have in your party. I mean, Dave Nellis openly embraced Jeremy Corbyn. That treacherous man that has destroyed your party. He doesn't believe in your party. Corbyn does not believe in your party. He didn't believe in Corbynism when he was head of the Labour Party. We believed in Corbynism. Well, reformist as it is. Jeremy Corbyn didn't believe in Corbynism. He destroyed Corbynism. He destroyed the Labour Party, and he's done exactly the same thing again with your party. Sultana, if there's any faction, you abandon this party. Abandon it. You don't work with these people. You abandon them, and you set up a new formation. And as I say, that formation has got to be a revolutionary socialist organization on a socialist program built at the grassroots, the factories, the workplaces, the schools, all across the board. Build it from the bottom up. Workers' committees from the bottom up. And you link them all together, and that's how you build your new revolutionary formation. That formation would have an entirely different program and a different appeal to the working class, not the ones that the Greens were really offering, the genuine working class on a socialist program. That is what's needed. And any organization on the left, whichever one's going to do that, is the one that will develop the trust and the confidence of the working class movement. It's a lesson for us, not just the Sultana wing of your party. Thank you, Finn.
Thank you, Harry. So, Matthew, you'll have another opportunity to speak at the end of the meeting. So, if you want to cover some of the points at this stage, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think there's a whole slew of issues in here. I mean, I think in those times, people ask about the role of Zara Sultana. I mean, Zara Sultana, of course, comes from essentially from the student movements and through the Labour Party as the youth wing of the Labour Party, and therefore, obviously, you can see the political limitations. However, the point being is she has actually, along with a few or two other people, called for overthrow of capitalism. I mean, obviously, politically is not a question, but the point is that's what she said, and I think that's the interesting thing. Actually, that's becoming more popular. The system, the notion, that the system itself is done and incapable, and is actually sort of actually leading towards the destruction of humanity if it's left in the way it is becoming increasingly more of the point now. The question becomes, in terms of democracy. I mean, the thing is, ultimately, what you're looking at, of course, is that the ruling class itself, capitalism, is not a particularly democratic system. I mean, it can afford democracy at a certain point, at points where it's not in crisis. And obviously, as the crisis gets worse, it gets increasingly authoritarian. It's obviously that goes through the politics. You can see it everywhere. Whether that's the Labour Party, which obviously it was had a certain veneer of democracy, but were never particularly so. Certainly, in the points, the key points of it always had. There was always a position in which the membership, etc. Anything said by the membership could be ignored, and that's always the case. And you can see it in your party as well. I mean, the problem is, simply that under the conditions, and unless you actually, you have a political perspective, building a democratic revolutionary organization, then obviously you can't afford this stuff. I mean, in terms of what Harry's saying, in terms of I don't think the Socialist Party is particularly revolutionary at all. Actually, if you look at it, actually, what it actually represents, probably closest to a section of the union bureaucracy. And the SWP similarly. The SWP, essentially, you could probably look at as liberal, actually, in the way it behaves. It's certainly not revolutionary. And their major intellectual clinicos actually is a supporter of the Frankfurt School. And the point being, of course, is that obviously the Frankfurt School has no faith in the working class at all, which you can see, actually. The interesting thing in Scotland, of course, you can see all of this because all of these people are Scottish nationalists. All these organisations are Scottish nationalists, i.e. the creation of a small capitalist state will solve everything, which is a bizarre notion, but it's extremely common now on the left, and including going through all these organisations, that the creation of the capitalist independent state of Scotland will solve anything, which it won't. It actually make things worse. But that's the core question. And I think also, in terms of what Norm was saying, into the programmatic question, I think that's right. But it's then how to get to that. I think that the core of this actually, of course, is you do have this the people who are actually organising through the grassroots left, as I say, is a section of younger active people, and those are the interesting people in this process. And I don't agree with Harry when he said it's dead. If you look at it, people want this to work. Whether it does or not, it's another matter. But the point being is they want it to work, and therefore it will have life. It will continue one way or another. It will continue. In terms of what does it represent? The key problem here you've got in terms of Britain, of course, is the very low level of the class struggle. The driver, the actual driver, for probably in excess of 35 years, the class struggle has been a very low level in Britain now. And continue, and you have a position in which actually, of course, the union machines are used against their own members. People have no faith in trade unions anymore because, if they ever come into struggle, of course, besides facing management, usually they face their own union bureaucracy. They're paying people who come around and do them in, and that's happened over and over and over again. And those people, the thing is, it's the whole thing still lines up. Even the likes of, say, the interesting thing is if you look at something like Unison, which is the biggest union in Britain, which is just elected for the first time as a general secretary, somebody who's not in the core bureaucracy, which is a self-sustaining operation, the apprenticeship bureaucracy of Unison. Andrea Egan, just been elected. However, come to Gorton and Denton by-election, she's offering advice to the Labour Party, can I say? You'd have thought, under the conditions, you would say there needs to be a break from this piece of crap. But there you are. That's the political. You're sitting there and sort of, in some way, in a political deadlock. I think that. The other thing that really also, of course, the other driver, of course, is the Palestine movement, and I think that the political implications of that, has to be got through as well. Because in terms of that, you've had now, of course, an effort to suppress, a mass movement by police methods, people being locked up. essentially as political prisoners. I mean, a series of political prisoners in Britain, high profile political prisoners, 23 of whom have just been let out because they failed in the courts, under conditions in which obviously there's still a mass movement behind them, and under conditions in which the entire political establishment in this country has backed the genocide. I mean, I don't think this has been drawn out enough to say, well, look, what we do, actually the politicians we face are actually blood-soaked monsters, I mean, and that has been made clear to, for those people who watch, that actually what you're looking at is a bunch of people who are, one quite, see it as normal business. The killing of hundreds of thousands is normal business. And that's a warning. That's a warning to the world as well. That in fact, we're getting it again in Iran. But I mean, in particularly savage nature in Gaza, also because it was exposed in public that the journalists, Palestinian journalists in Gaza, exposed this and continue to do so daily. People can watch it on their phones every damn day. All this what's being done, and that has an enormous political effect, and that I think also has to be worked through. And it's in terms of, I mean, I think that I suspect that what we will see is some form of a split, but on what basis I don't know yet. Because obviously, what is happening now, of course, is that things are being made. It's being made untenable for what people want to do. I mean, people want to offer some kind of political alternative, which is more coherent than the Green Party. I mean, the problem is, you look at the Green Party clearly is classically a petty bourgeois party, actually, and it classically won't challenge the existing order. However, of course, it's being channeled. I mean, you can almost see it in terms of the way the media present it. Things are being channeled towards that. People are joining the thing, but it's completely inadequate. The interesting thing in Scotland, actually, is that a whole bunch of people in the Greens, because of the nature of the fact that the Greens in Scotland have been in government in Holyrood, have actually left the Greens and joined your party in the process. So the biggest political group, I think, probably in your party in Scotland are ex-Greens, who also because of not only because of the political questions, but also, of course, the resultant internal machinations and people being suppressed and all the sort of thing badly treated and so on. That it comes out of that, and of course that process will go on elsewhere. I mean, you can see. I mean, every time the Greens ever get into any kind of office, I mean, people can see what happens. The question is, how do you offer an alternative? Now, I mean, as I say, I think this thing there will be some kind of a split, but how that works out, I don't know. And in terms of the detail and so on, but I think it's working towards that. I think what people have said is right in terms of trying to produce some kind of political clarity. That's true, but and then of course trying to get people to read and think and the rest of it and move forward politically is another thing. So okay, I'll finish there.
Thank you, Matthew. No, we're a little bit pressurized, I'd say, at this point, so for time. So, Dominic or John? Dominic, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a small point, because if you look at it from the beginning of, say, last year, or somewhere around that period, where you had this 850,000 had an indication that they wanted to join your party, and the situation at the conference where you had about 25,000 people who were still in a position where they actually bothered to vote in your party, that collapse has been, to my mind, down to Corbyn and the faction behind him and whoever's there. But it's not a question of his sort of will or what sort of party he wants. It's a question of what sort of country he wants, what sort of world he wants. Because I think you've got to take it on board that as far as the social democratic politicians are concerned, And as far as the vast majority of trade union leaders are concerned, they want a capitalist society. The idea of actually challenging the existence of a capitalist society is absolutely abhorrent to them, despite the fact that they're supposed to be in a labour movement looking for change. So I think you've got to keep that in mind, that what the political drive for them is concerned is not one of just being awkward and not being wanting, to do things. It's that they're positively working towards the existence of the present system and no challenge towards it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dominic. The discussion so far has been very good. There's solutions have been explored and questions have been developed. I want to ask a question of the comrades who are involved. What's happening at a local level in any area? Are there branches? Is there discussion? Are there resolutions? Are people attending? Is there a local life in the constituent parts of the Your Party? Because that's a key question. If there isn't, then what's the point? But the question is, can comrades give examples, maybe illustrations at least, as to the kind of activity that's happening at a local level?
Do you want me to answer that?
Well, anybody, you'll have a chance anyway, Matthew, to speak later to summarise it. By all means, if nobody else deals with it, but I'm interested in the comrades' experience here. Are they attending local meetings? Who's going to them? What's being discussed? Okay, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are local meetings, and I think it depends on where you are and how many members there are, and then of course it's all questions of how getting in contact with people. But yes, they do meet regularly, and there are discussions, and there is activities, including people doing stuff publicly, street stalls and so on and so forth. So yeah, it is in those terms it runs, and there will be people who will stand for election in the next few weeks. So yeah, in those terms, there is the life at the base. Yeah.
Thank you. Harry, you've indicated again.
Yeah, in relation to the north of Ireland here, you see, we never got confirmation that your party would organise in the north of Ireland. We actually thought there would be a great deal of resistance to organise here. And so there has been an initiative that took place towards the end of last year, effectively by militant left. And they pulled together, there was one meeting, I think it was November, that they pulled together and invited certainly some left parties, trade unions to the meeting to discuss the formation of a new organisation here in the north of Ireland. And there seems to be a bit of an impetus to form something around a new formation, but it's not your party. And I think from the meeting itself, I don't think, I mean, to be honest with you, I think we've abandoned your party, or at least any possible potential that it will form here or anything like that. So we are discussing, we were to meet actually, I thought it was supposed to be this month again, of proposals about how we move it forward. And that hasn't happened yet. We're still waiting for information on that, how any new formation would develop here, what it's going to be, what's going to be named, what policies it be, and who's actually going to be involved. And so we're still waiting for that to happen. But at the moment, there's perhaps with a small f, there is a possibility of a new formation developing here in the north of Ireland. But as I said, it's not your party, and it's outside your party.
Thank you, Harry. No, comrades, this is your last opportunity if you want to make...
Finn, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Roger. I'm speaking from my iPhone. I haven't been able to... I don't think you can see me, and I don't think you could hear me until just now. I've been trying to indicate I wanted to speak. Just very, very briefly, I think it's been a really, really useful discussion And although there have been quite contrary opinions expressed, Themos saying that we have to give it the utmost chance and stay in the party and be patient. We also heard Harry saying that we should just walk out. Zara Sultana should lead a split and form a new party. And although those are completely contradictory tactical steps that are being recommended, I actually agree with what's behind what both of the comrades have been saying. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's inevitable that there will be a split for the reasons which comrades have outlined. That the current leadership of your party doesn't want to create your party. It never wanted to in the first place. Corbyn never wanted to be leader of a rival party to Labour. He never wanted to be leader of the Labour Party either. He was horrified when he found himself elected as leader of the Labour Party, and from that very moment, he was desperate to give the leadership back to the right wing. And as soon as he could, he did. And he did not want to form the new party. I'm not, in many ways, I admire Corbyn, and he's a very amiable and a well-meaning character and so on. He's absolutely not a revolutionary. And he simply wants to be a kind of a maverick, a national character, if you like, a national treasure, like poor Tony Benn ended up as, although he was far, far superior, I think, to Corbyn in his clarity of analysis and his programme and his courage in every way. But nevertheless, right, that's why I think that there is no possibility of your party developing while it's under the dead hand of a Corbyn leadership. But I also think it's wrong for the left or for Zara Sultana to walk out. It will be seen, if she walked out now, it would be seen as simply pique and sulkiness because she lost the election. And that is, not only will that look like it to kind of the general population, not only will it look like it to the Corbyn supporters, the many in your party, but it will even look like that to many of her supporters too. That, you know, is this the right step to take? Because they supported her, they liked the way that the initiative that she'd taken in forcing the creation of the new party, but they want to understand why it has to come immediately to a split, simply on the basis of what, as I say, would look like pique at losing the election. I think the important thing is to stay and fight. And I know there are many people who are close to us, close to win, who are saying, well, that's it, finished with your party. The best thing is to, for want of anything better, support the Greens. But I think that's wrong. You don't walk out after the first. The battle has not really been joined yet. You don't desert the battlefield just on the basis of one setback. And therefore, I think it's necessary to fight. So I do think there are branches which are flourishing. Mine isn't, certainly. It's controlled by the SWP, and they are not prepared to give it any life of its own. There are no other branches in the immediate vicinity where I live either. So I feel I share the frustration of other comrades about all of those. But I know that there are branches that are functioning very well. And of course, sooner or later, they will come up against the straitjacket placed on them by the Corbyn leadership. And the time will come, and the justification will come, and the rationale will come to have a split, and a serious split, which would not just take some disgruntled losers, if you like, out of your party, but it will be on a genuinely clear political basis. So I think that what we have to say, what we said, we in Win 2 or 3 years ago, we formed a pressure group, if you like, a campaigning group, which we called which we called Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party. And it's been very successful. We've called open forum discussion meetings, at one of which we actually had 350 people came to attend and participate in the discussions. And we're still doing that on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And it's a really effective forum. But when we first started the Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party, there was, a Mass Workers' Party was not a gleam in the eye of either Jeremy Corbyn or Zara Sultana. That nothing whatsoever had been announced or declared even as a long-term objective. And we said that we need a new party of the working class because that is what is needed in the situation. And what we said is, nature, according to the scientists, nature abhors a vacuum. Politics also abhors a vacuum. The reason why a new party, a party of the working class will be created is because there is a vacuum there. There's a gap. There's a need for a workers' organisation to be formed, for a workers' party to be formed. It is erratic and eccentric. It's incompatible. It's unviable for politics to continue with that huge gaping gap. And how do we know that there's a vacuum there? Well, from the point of view, for instance, that 5 million people, more people voted Labour under Corbyn in 2017 than voted Labour under Brown or Miliband, or even at least 500,000 less voted for Starmer when he won the so-called landslide victory last year. So we know that there are millions of people, at the very least hundreds of thousands of people, who want a new party of the left. And we know that also from the fact that when Zara simply just first gave that little opening, that little spark, said, look, we want to form a new party. This is, me and Jeremy are going to be co-leaders of a new party. Anybody interested? Within days, 800,000 people signed up and said, yes, we want that party. We want to join that party. So we know that there's a gap. We know there's a huge vacuum. So therefore, something will fill that vacuum. Of course, it's not that it doesn't matter how it's filled. It's not that it doesn't matter that they completely messed it up. That Corbyn and Zara, to a certain extent, shares some of that blame, have messed up things, and we end up now in this pitiful situation. But something at least will survive out of this. It may be a party, it won't be a mass party, but maybe at least it'll be a sizable party, a bigger party, a bigger left group, shall we say, than has existed in Britain probably in my lifetime, in several decades. So I think we need to stay, but we also have to be realistic that there will be convulsions and splits and upheavals to come, and we should be at the forefront of a genuine mass left, at least a large-scale left break from the new party within the short term. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you, Roger. At this point, I want to welcome Ian to the meeting. Unfortunately, and you missed a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure your contribution would have been very useful and very helpful to the discussion. So in the remaining time, if you could speak, because we're under pressure, if you could speak fairly briefly and give us a summary of the points you wanted to make during the meeting. But you're welcome to the meeting.
Hi, thank you, comrade, and apologies. I'm actually at your party Edinburgh branch meeting now, which is why I've missed most of the meeting. I've got a 10-minute break, of which I've got about 6 minutes left. It was good to hear what Roger was saying just now as well. I know that's the level of discussion we've been having for a couple of hours. I'm sorry I missed it. Corner, and I'll try and catch up later. I was just really wanting to report on my campaign in Scotland, where we've got some of our own issues. When the thing was launched this summer, when the sign-ups were building up across the country, the last time was measured in parallel in Scotland and across the whole country. Scotland was ahead population. There were, I think, 60,000 signed here, 88,000 in Britain as a whole. So there's a real mood for it in Scotland, just as there is across Britain. There's also an extra element that the Green Party, which have really eaten our lunch from all factionalism and delays across the country, doesn't exist here, not the same one. My sister invited me to join the Greens. She lives in London, and she got sick of waiting. I said they wouldn't have me. There's a Scottish Green Party instead, and it's been in government, a national level in Holyrood, quite recently with the SNP. So the same problems that we have with Greens in councils across England, where they get into power, they're the same as the other parties in terms of council cuts. We've had that at the centre in Scotland as well on a national level. And actually, some of their more left-wing members have defected to your party rather than the other way around. One of them, to cut a long story short, has been elected now to the Central Executive Committee, endorsed by the grassroots left. So all three candidates in Scotland officially ran as independents. There was also a candidate endorsed by the many. I was probably the most independent of the independents, though the grassroots left did say to vote for me number two. In the end, I was briefly disqualified for being a supporter of the Campaign for a Mass Workers Party, a party in the name. The AI or Pavlovian response or whatever to the word party triggered some difficulties because of all the dual membership nonsense. In the end, that was overturned quite quickly as well. That was an extra bit of bureaucracy and of other needless problem along the way. Might actually have helped me get nominations. I don't know what they've got against Ian Spencer, who used to be in another party and left it, also got caught in the mix. Whereas much bigger figures than me, like Dave Nellis and Chris Williamson, were former left-wing Labour MPs who are in other parties. The rules were more faithfully applied to them and they didn't get back in. But taking a step back from rules as rules, someone like Dave Nellis is whatever disagreements you might have with him politically, I've got quite a few with his particular organisations, kind of guy you want to have on board. And if we've lost so much of the initial enthusiasm and sign-ups to the Greens, to then end up flinging out more people for being in these groups that we were trying to bring together and bring in, would be the worst thing that we could do. We need to have party unity now to a certain extent, in my opinion. I always said that unity and democracy were not a zero-sum game or even a tightrope act. They're actually complementary in this specific instance, where the party membership, the rank and file, the grassroots were the adults in the room and had a revolt against all the feuding at the top that went on in the autumn, and kept the party, to the extent that it is, still on track. We'll see what happens now. And I'm going back in a minute to argue that we should be standing candidates for Holyrood, but I'm not hugely confident that we'll win that in Edinburgh. We'll see. But part of that is because of all the delays that are still going on. But we certainly have a role to play distinct from the Greens. I actually campaigned briefly in Manchester, Gorton. It's a place I've spent more sleepovers in my adult life than anywhere else. I've got good friends there. Stayed over for demos against the Tories, left conferences, even a stag once. And it was funny when I was running in Scotland to see on the national news, I know that cafe, I know that park. And to distract from my wait, once the election was over, I took part in another nail-biting by-election, and I'm glad there was left unity around them in that specific setting. But with this war in Iran that's just started, we've seen the Greens haven't been as nimble in responding as your party even, because they've not got that tradition. They're probably going to take a very good position at their conference on Palestine. Their position on Ukraine is not so good. Their position on NATO, even when they're criticising Donald Trump quite well, is still very much not so good. And closer to home, their position on council cuts is not so good. These things are maybe issues that won't immediately be as obvious to the public as Starmer's spectacular betrayal or Jeremy and Zara's spectacular falling out. But they are reasons, justifications for our existence and not to be fully subordinated to them. But we also have to box clever, and it was right to, it was actually your party member, Salma Yaqub, who pioneered left unity in Manchester Gorton, that helped secure that vote that really humiliated both the government and the far-right putative alternative. So, yeah, we have to keep going. I think the old saying, splits and mergers, I'd prefer the second. I think we need mergers in the years ahead. There's a lot of people that have already split off, whether it's as individuals to the Greens or whole sections of parties and very prominent individuals who could have come around and haven't. I think that will be needed. Hopefully we'll get an intervention in Scotland. Hopefully we'll get an intervention in Edinburgh. And I've got to just dash back in there and argue for that right now. So wish me luck, comrades.
Yeah. Thank you once again for your valuable points there, Ian, and good luck in your endeavours in Scotland. Norma, can you be very, very brief? As you've indicated again, if you want to make a point, can you be very brief? Because we have to finish the meeting shortly.
Thanks, Finn. Just very quickly, I thank very much Roger's contribution, because at least for myself have clarified what are my concerns. And if I summarize for myself, is that just your party will split, so white keep inside and white and leave the battle, and this party, your party will split. I hope the name will of the splitted party will have some word as new party of left, of new party of workers, but the word new is very important. And it's true, nature doesn't like a vacuum or vacua. So this empty space must be filled, I hope, by a new party. And the option from what I heard here, even if it's there, is not the Greens. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. Now, we normally finish the meetings at 6. So in the remaining time, Matthew, can you make some very brief concluding remarks?
Yeah, okay, thanks, comrades. No, useful discussion. I hope people know, understand a little better what we're facing. And I think that Roger's point is right. I mean, in terms of, there needs to be a party of the working class. I mean, this is what, obviously as somebody pointed out about the Blair government, what is it? The Labour Party is now the party of big business, and obviously it wasn't quite true. When you actually what happened, of course, was that the advent of Corbynism, basically because hundreds of thousands of people joined because they thought the Labour Party might be a vehicle to fight austerity. But there needs to be some expression. It needs to be a political expression of the working class. And obviously, I mean the ruling class and so on would much rather that wasn't the case. But it will come through. The question is on what basis? And what we're really saying is the fundamental question to watch is not personal issues. What it's painted is personal issues between Sultana and Corbyn, but the real questions of the nature of the organisation, is it socialist? I mean, I agree. Anybody who said your party's an appalling name. And if we'd been offered, we should have something that has either at least has socialist or workers or something of that nature in it. It signifies exactly what it is. So in those terms, it's aimed to clarify the politics that come out of this and hope we can get through some of the confusion and move forward. At the same time, obviously, the struggle against, as comrades have also alluded to, the struggle against the far right and war is critical. So thanks very much.
Yeah, I want to thank Matthew for his insightful and very informative contributions to the meeting. And I want to thank all the comrades who spoke. It's been a very, very useful and very informative gathering. We didn't resolve questions, but that's not the purpose of meeting. We're meeting to discuss and to explore and to examine questions with a view to resolving the questions. So there's lots to think about, and we'll be coming back to this issue, just like we'll be coming back to the issue of war in the Middle East and the appalling attitudes being adopted by the Trump administration in the US at this time. We'll be coming back to that. So thanks again, comrades, for your contributions. And I'm not sure, actually, is there somebody prepared to tell us a bit about next week's meeting? Roger, are you?
Well, yeah, okay. It's International Women's Day 1 week today, and we have two very formidable women comrades lined up to speak. One is the legendary Audrey White. Audrey was the worker in Liverpool who 20 or 30 years ago led the historic strike against sexual harassment at work, which led to a change in the law. But it was a strike, I think, lasted several weeks, if not months, and gained national prominence. And as I say, ended up in a major change in the law. Following that, she got into a dispute, like many of us have, with the Jewish Chronicle, and won a libel action against them with a substantial settlement. And finally, what brought her to the news more recently is a couple of years ago at a Labour Party conference, she was seen on video towering over Keir Starmer, who was sitting at a sort of conference-side cafe, and just a 10-minute tirade denouncing him as a traitor to the Labour movement, which went viral and was seen by probably millions of people. So she's very well qualified to speak on the struggles of women. But the other comrade who's also speaking is our own Pam Bromley, who comrades know, really in effect the secretary of WIN. She is the editor of our website, and she runs the Zoom meetings normally. And she also was a councillor on, I think, Rotherham Council, where she, of course, defied the leadership on council cuts. And she also won a legal action, or I think the legal action was called off, I think, as a result of her fighting it. But it was an action for libel brought against her, or sorry, it was an action on alleged anti-Semitic behaviour, which was brought against her together with Ken Livingstone, and they emerged triumphant from that battle too. So two very good comrades speaking on the importance of International Women's Day. That's next week.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. So thanks again, comrades, for your contributions to this meeting. And we look forward to seeing you all next week at the discussion about women's role in the revolutionary struggle and the struggle for socialism. So, slán go raibh go léir agus í. So thanks, comrades.